The stars have always been patient teachers, if one possesses the wisdom to listen. They burn for billions of years in perfect silence, asking nothing, offering everything: light, warmth, the very atoms that compose our bodies. I have lived for 917 standard cycles, and in all that time I believed I understood what the stars were trying to teach us: patience, endurance, the quiet dignity of existing across unfathomable time.
I was wrong.
The stars were not teaching us patience, they were teaching us humility, and we, the Volketh ascendancy, who had sailed between those ancient lights for 12,000 years, who had watched younger species rise and fall like seasons on a forgotten world, we never learned the lesson at all.
My name is Keth Voran, and I am the last High Chronicler of the Ascendancy. I write this record not for my people, for there are precious few of us remaining. I write it for those who will come after, for those who will look upon the ashes of our empire and wonder what great calamity befell us, for those who will ask the question that now haunts what remains of my dreams: what were the humans, truly, and why did we not see? To understand the end, you must understand the beginning. Not the beginning of humanity. That story is theirs to tell, and they guard it with a reverence I once mistook for shame. No, I speak of the beginning of our folly, the moment when the Galactic Concord, that grand assembly of the 17 elder races, voted to punish Earth. It was the year 3847 by the human calendar. By ours, it was the cycle of amber twilight, the 4,000th anniversary of our first faster-than-light voyage. We had prepared celebrations across 100 worlds. Monuments were unveiled, songs were composed. The ascendancy was at its zenith, and we believed, truly believed, that our glory would endure forever. The humans had been known to us for only 2 centuries, a blink, a breath. They had emerged from their small blue world with such eagerness, such desperate hope, reaching toward the stars like children grasping for lights they could not yet understand. We found them quaint. Their ships were crude, their technology laughable, their lifespans so brief that by the time one of their diplomats learned our customs, they were already dying of old age. We gave them a small territory on the galactic rim, 23 systems, most of them barely habitable. We thought we were being generous. We thought we were being kind. We did not see the way they looked at those stars, not with gratitude, but with hunger, not with submission, but with patience. The trouble began, as trouble often does, with a misunderstanding. A Velshari trading convoy vanished near the human border. The Velshari, those crystalline merchants who had grown fat on 10,000 years of galactic commerce, demanded answers. The humans claimed ignorance. They offered to help search. They opened their territory to investigation. They did everything right, and yet the Velshari saw only guilt in their cooperation.
"They are too helpful," Ambassador Crystalline Voice of Morning declared before the Concord. "They hide something. Species so young do not offer such openness unless they fear what we might find."
I was there that day, seated in the High Chronicler's position above the assembly floor. I remember watching the human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Chen, small and dark-haired, with eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She stood alone before the 17 elder races, her single aide waiting outside, and she listened to the Velshari accusations with an expression I could not read. When it was her turn to speak, she did not defend, she did not accuse, She simply asked a question.
Honored Ambassador, how many ships have vanished in that region over the past 1,000 years?
Crystalline voice of morning flickered with irritation. That is not relevant.
47, Ambassador Chen continued, as if she had not heard. 47 ships from 11 different species, dating back 912 years, long before humanity ever left Earth. The region contains a gravitational anomaly that our scientists have been studying. We believe it may be responsible. We would be happy to share our research.
The chamber fell silent. I watched the Velshari ambassador's crystalline form pulse with colors I had never seen before, colors that spoke of embarrassment, of rage at being embarrassed, of something deeper that I would only later recognize as fear.
You dare, crystalline voice of morning said, lecture us on the history of our own territory?
It was never your territory, Ambassador Chen replied, her voice soft but somehow filling the entire chamber. It was unclaimed. We claimed it, and we have studied it. That is all.
She was right, of course. In every legal and factual sense, she was right. But the Velshari had not become one of the elder races by accepting correction from children. And the other elder races, my own people included, had not maintained their positions by appearing weak before the assembly.
The vote was called 3 days later.
It was not a vote for war, not exactly. We were too civilized for that. It was a vote for corrective measures, economic sanctions, territorial restrictions, a reduction of their already meager space lanes, a reminder of their place in the cosmic order. The vote was unanimous. 17 elder races, 12,000 years of accumulated wisdom, and not one voice of dissent. I cast my own vote with the bored certainty of someone swatting an insect. The humans were an annoyance, nothing more. They would learn their lesson. They would submit. They would be grateful, eventually, that we had condescended to teach them.
Ambassador Chen received the verdict with that same unreadable expression. She stood perfectly still as the sanctions were read, her hands clasped behind her back, her breathing slow and even. When it was finished, she simply nodded.
Earth acknowledges the Concord's decision, she said. We will comply with all requirements. No argument, no protest, no appeal to justice or mercy, just acceptance. We should have been suspicious. We should have wondered why a species that had clawed its way from a single fragile world to the stars would submit so quietly to humiliation. We should have asked ourselves what that calm exterior was concealing. But we did not. We celebrated our easy victory. We congratulated ourselves on maintaining galactic order, and we forgot about the humans entirely.
That was our first mistake.
The devouring began 11 years later. I remember the day the first reports arrived. I was in my study on Keth Voran Prime, reviewing historical records, when my aide burst through the door with a face the color of ash. The Mortai hegemony, oldest of the elder races, masters of the galactic core, commanders of a fleet that numbered in the millions, had gone silent. Not defeated, not invaded, silent. 17 worlds, 42 billion souls, vanished in a single night. At first, we did not believe it. The Mortai were ancient beyond ancient, their technology so advanced that it bordered on magic. They had weapons that could crack planets, shields that could withstand the fury of supernovae, ships that moved between dimensions like shadows between heartbeats. Nothing could destroy the Mortai.
But the silence was real. The worlds were empty, and on each dead planet, burned into the surface in letters visible from orbit, was a single word in a language none of us recognized.
Tribute.
The Concord assembled in emergency session. For the first time in 3,000 years, all 17 elder races sent their highest representatives, not ambassadors, but rulers, emperors, queens, hive minds, the beings who held the fate of the galaxy in their ancient hands.
I stood in my chronicler's position and watched them argue. The Velshari blamed the Carthax, their ancient rivals. The Carthax accused the Luminari of treachery. The Luminari wondered if the Mortai had destroyed themselves in some great experiment gone wrong. Theory after theory, accusation after accusation, and beneath it all, a terror that none of them would name.
The devouring was not finished.
Over the next 3 years, it took 6 more elder races. The Velshari crystalline homeworld shattered like glass, billions of sentient gems scattered to the void. The Carthax were consumed from within, their hive bodies turning against themselves in silent, screaming death. The Luminari, beings of pure light who had transcended physical form 10,000 years ago, simply flickered out, one moment blazing with the radiance of 1,000 suns, the next darkness.
And always, always, the same word burned into whatever remained.
Tribute. The Concord fractured. Ancient alliances crumbled. Fleets that had protected shipping lanes for millennia turned on each other, each race convinced that another was somehow responsible. The galaxy burned, and we burned with it. And still we did not see what was hunting us.
I lost my homeworld on the 3rd day of the cycle of frozen stars. I was aboard my personal vessel, returning from a diplomatic mission when the feeds went dark. By the time I arrived, there was nothing left. Keth-Vorin Prime, jewel of the Ascendancy, home to 9 billion of my people, reduced to a field of cooling debris.
Tribute. The debris spelled, tumbling slowly in the light of our dying sun.
I drifted for 17 days. My crew of 43 dwindled to 12 as systems failed and hope died. We were found by a salvage vessel from a species I did not recognize, small, mammalian, with soft skin and strangely expressive faces. They pulled us from the wreckage, fed us, healed our wounds, and asked nothing in return.
They were human.
The vessel was called the Mercy of Buenos Aires, and its captain was a man named Diego Okonkwo, a strange amalgamation of names that I would later learn represented the beautiful mongrel nature of human heritage. He was tall for his species, with skin the color of fertile soil, and gray threading through his dark hair. His eyes held a sadness that seemed to go back generations.
When I was strong enough to speak, he came to my quarters. He did not stand over me, as a Concord official would have. He sat, placing himself at my level, and waited until I met his eyes before speaking.
High Chronicler Keth-Vorin, he said, and the use of my title sent a shiver through my scales. I'm sorry for your loss.
I did not know how to respond. The Valketh do not apologize. It implies wrongdoing, and the humans had done nothing wrong. We had wronged them. We had punished them for speaking truth, stripped them of rights, confined them to the edges of civilization.
"Why?" I asked, and my voice cracked on the word. "Why did you save us?" Captain Okonkwo tilted his head slightly. A gesture I would learn indicated thoughtful consideration. "Because you were dying," he said simply, "and we could help." "But the Concord, I could not finish. The shame was too great. The Concord punished us for being right, he said, and there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of tired understanding. That was 11 years ago. We've had time to think about it.
And you are not angry?
He was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, and for the first time I saw something flicker in those deep brown eyes. Something old, something vast. High Chronicler, we spent thousands of years enslaving each other, murdering each other, burning each other's cities and salting each other's fields. We built gas chambers and gulags and learned 100 ways to make our own kind suffer. And you know what we discovered after all that horror?
I shook my head, unable to speak.
That holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. We learned that the hard way, the very hard way. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. The Concord sanctions hurt us. Our children went hungry. Our elders died in cold hospitals because we couldn't afford fuel. We lost 20 million people in the first 2 years.
I felt my heart's clench. 20 million. For a species so young, so few in number, it must have been devastating.
But we survived, he continued. We always survive. That's what we do, High Chronicler. We survive, and we adapt, and we remember. We remember everything.
What do you want from us? I whispered. What do you want from me?
Captain Okonkwo stood and moved to the door. Before he left, he looked back at me with those ancient, sorrowful eyes. "We want you to live," he said. "We want all of you to live. What happens after, well, that's up to you." He left me alone with my thoughts and my grief, and a question that would consume me for years. What were these humans, really, and why did they look at the galaxy's suffering not with satisfaction, but with something that looked terribly like recognition? The mercy of Buenos Aires brought us to a human station called Hope's Anchor, and what I saw there changed everything I believed about the galaxy. It was not impressive, I must be clear about that. After the crystal spires of Velshar, the light sculptures of the Luminari, the world ships of the Mortai, the human station seemed almost pathetically functional. Gray metal, exposed conduits, harsh lighting that illuminated every imperfection. There was no art, no grandeur, no attempt to project power or prestige. But it was full. Refugees from a dozen species crowded the corridors. Velshari crystals, their light dim with trauma but still alive. Carthax workers separated from their collective, learning for the first time what it meant to be individuals. Even a handful of Mortai survivors, their ancient arrogance shattered, accepting food and shelter from beings they had once considered barely sentient. And everywhere, humans. Humans carrying supplies. Humans treating wounds. Humans holding crying children of species that had voted to starve them. They moved through the chaos with a quiet efficiency that seemed almost mechanical, except for the way they would stop, always stop, to offer a word of comfort, a touch, a moment of genuine connection. I was assigned quarters and a human liaison named Dr. Yuki Tanaka. She was small, even by human standards, with silver-streaked black hair and hands that never quite stopped moving. She was, I would later learn, 217 years old, ancient for a human in those days before their life extension technologies matured.
"High Chronicler," she said, and the respect in her voice seemed genuine. "I've been assigned to help you adjust. If you need anything, food, medical care, someone to talk to, please don't hesitate to ask."
"I need to understand," I said. "I need to understand what is happening. What is the devouring? Why can't anyone stop it?
And why?
I hesitated. The question that had been burning in me since I first woke on the human ship. Why has it not touched humanity?
Dr. Tanaka's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes, a wall going up, a door closing.
What makes you think it hasn't? She asked quietly.
Your worlds are intact. Your people are here, healthy, organized. You are rescuing others while the elder races burn. If the devouring had touched you, you would not be in a position to help anyone.
She was silent for a long time. Then she gestured to a chair and sat down across from me, her hands finally still.
What do you know about human history, High Chronicler?
Very little, I admitted. You are a young species. Your records are limited, your achievements modest, no offense intended.
None taken. A small smile crossed her lips, but it did not reach her eyes. We are young by galactic standards, but we are also old by our own. Do you know what we call the century before we achieved faster than light travel? I shook my head. We call it the Century of Ashes. We nearly destroyed ourselves so many times, High Chronicler. Nuclear weapons, biological agents, climate collapse. We stood on the edge of extinction not once, not twice, but over and over again. And each time, somehow, we pulled back. We found a way.
Many species have difficult histories, I said, though I was beginning to sense that this was something different.
Yes, she agreed, but most species have their difficult histories imposed on them from outside. Asteroids, climate shifts, predators. We imposed ours on ourselves. We invented new and creative ways to suffer, and then we invented new and creative ways to survive that suffering.
She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to barely above a whisper.
The Concord looked at us and saw primitives, barbarians who had barely mastered fire. They didn't realize that they were looking at the survivors of 100 apocalypses. They didn't see that every human alive is descended from people who refused to die, who crawled through ashes and blood and horror to reach the next dawn.
I felt a chill run through my scales. Why are you telling me this?
Because you asked why the devouring hasn't touched us. She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. It has, High Chronicler. It came for us first. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heart's beating, feel the blood pulsing through my veins. That's impossible, I said. The devouring began with the Mortai. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what we allowed them to know. She turned back to me, and for the first time I saw her true age in her eyes. 2 centuries of watching, waiting, preparing. The entity you call the devouring made contact with Earth 43 years ago, before we had even left our solar system. 43 years, I calculated rapidly. That was before we even knew you existed. Yes. What happened? Dr. Tanaka smiled, and this time it was not small or sad. It was the smile of someone holding a knife behind their back. We made a deal, she said, and then we broke it. In the days that followed, I learned the truth. Not all at once. The humans were too careful for that, but in pieces, fragments, stories shared over meals and walks through the crowded station corridors. I learned of the entity they called the Harvester, and of the first terrible night when humanity understood they were not alone in the universe. It came to them in dreams. Every human on Earth, all 8 billion of them, sharing the same nightmare on the same night. A voice from the darkness, ancient beyond comprehension, offering a simple choice: serve
or die.
The elder races, when confronted with the harvester, had done what seemed logical. The Mortai had tried to fight and been erased. The Velshari had tried to bargain and been shattered. The Carthax had tried to hide and been found. Each race responded according to its nature, and each was found wanting. But the humans did something none of the elder races would have ever conceived. They asked questions.
What do you want? They asked. Why do you need us? What is the tribute for?
And the harvester, for the first time in its eternal existence, encountered something it did not understand. Genuine curiosity. Not fear, not defiance, just a species that wanted to know.
It told them. In the cold mathematics of cosmic horror, it explained that it fed on potential, on the futures that would never be. It consumed civilizations at their peak, drinking in all the possibilities they would never realize. The older and more advanced the species, the sweeter the taste. The humans were, by this measure, barely worth the effort. Their potential was vast, but unrealized, their futures clouded by their own self-destructive tendencies. The harvester could consume them, certainly, but the yield would be minimal. They were, in its ancient estimation, not yet ripe.
So it offered them a deal. Point it toward riper prey and be spared. Serve as scouts, as Judas goats, leading the elder races to their doom. In 1,000 years, when humanity had reached its own peak, the harvester would return to claim its delayed tribute.
The humans asked for time to consider.
And then they did something that the harvester, in all its billions of years, had never encountered. They disagreed with each other. They argued. They debated. They held votes and referendums and endless screaming discussions about what to do. Some wanted to accept the deal. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to pray. Some wanted to pretend it had never happened.
In the end, they did what humans have always done when faced with impossible choices. They chose a third option.
We told the harvester we accepted, Dr. Tanaka explained. We pointed it toward the Mortai, the oldest and ripest of the elder races. We played the part of terrified primitives willing to betray anyone to survive. You led it to the Mortai, I said, feeling sick. You helped it destroy them.
We bought 40 years, she replied, and her voice was steel wrapped in silk. 40 years while it feasted on the elder races. 40 years while you all burned. 40 years while we watched and learned and prepared.
Prepared for what?
For this. She pressed a control on the wall, and the viewport transformed into a display showing the entire galaxy. 17 regions were marked in red, the territories of the elder races, now dark and dead. But across the rim, in the small slice of space that the Concord had condescended to grant humanity, there was a web of green light. Connections, networks, defenses.
We couldn't fight it then, Dr. Tanaka said. We were too young, too weak, too divided. But we always knew, that the deal was a lie. The harvester would come for us eventually, so we did what humans do. We prepared.
I stared at the display, understanding beginning to dawn. The sanctions, the restrictions the Concord placed on you,
gave us an excuse to turn inward, to focus on development rather than expansion, to build things in secret that we could never have built under scrutiny. She smiled again, that knife-edge smile. The Concord thought they were punishing us. They were giving us the camouflage we needed.
Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why reveal your secrets to an enemy?
Because you're not our enemy, High Chronicler. You never were. She sat down again, and the steel in her voice softened. You were afraid. You were arrogant. You made a cruel and unjust decision because it was easier than admitting you might be wrong. But you're not evil. None of the elder races are truly evil. You're just old. Old and set in your ways and terrified of change.
And now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper.
Now you're dying, and we're going to save you.
I did not believe her. I could not believe her. The elder races commanded fleets of millions, technologies refined over millennia, knowledge accumulated across 1,000 generations. If they could not stand against the harvester, what hope did a single young species have? But in the weeks that followed, I watched, I observed, and slowly, terribly, I began to understand. The refugees kept arriving, thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions. They came from every corner of the galaxy, survivors of species I had never heard of, brought to human stations by human ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. The humans processed them, housed them, fed them, integrated them into a system that grew more complex and more efficient by the day. And they never stopped moving. That was what struck me most. The humans never rested, never paused, never seemed to reach a point where they were satisfied with their preparations. Every day, new ships launched. Every day, new stations came online. Every day, the web of green light on the display grew a little larger, a little brighter, a little more intricate. I asked to see their shipyards, expecting to be refused. Instead, Captain Okonkwo personally escorted me to a facility in the outer reaches of human space. What I saw there broke something in my understanding of the universe. The shipyard was not a station. It was an entire system. 3 gas giants, their moons converted into industrial complexes, their atmospheres mined for fuel and materials, their rings transformed into assembly lines that stretched for millions of kilometers. Ships emerged from those rings in a continuous stream, not individually crafted masterpieces like the elder races built, but identical, efficient, mass-produced machines of war. We call it the Forge of Terra, Captain Okonkwo said, standing beside me at the observation deck. It's one of 12. 12? I could not keep the shock from my voice. The Valketh ascendancy at our peak had maintained 3 major shipyards. The Mortai, greatest of the elder races, had perhaps 5. We learned from you, he said, and there was no mockery in his voice. All of you. We watched how the elder races built their fleets, beautiful, elegant, irreplaceable, each ship a work of art that took decades to construct, and we asked ourselves, what happens when you lose one? It is a tragedy, I said automatically. Each ship carries centuries of tradition, of knowledge. Each ship is a single point of failure, he interrupted gently. A masterpiece that cannot be replaced. So you protect them, you hold them back, you never risk them except in guaranteed victories. He gestured toward the endless stream of ships emerging from the rings. We don't build masterpieces, High Chronicler. We build tools, weapons, things that can be lost and replaced and lost again. Because war isn't about building the perfect sword. It's about having enough swords to keep fighting after the first one breaks. I watched the ships flow outward, wave after wave, a river of steel and purpose. How many? I asked. How many what? How many ships do you have, in total? Captain Okonkwo smiled, and for the first time I saw something fierce behind his gentle exterior. At last count, about 400 million. But that was last week. The number is higher now.
400 million. The Valketh ascendancy in our greatest age had commanded a fleet of 8 million. The Mortai, masters of the galaxy, had perhaps 20 million, and the humans, punished and confined and dismissed as primitives.
How? I whispered. How is this possible?
Because we never stopped building, he said simply. While you were celebrating your anniversaries and unveiling your monuments, we were working. Every human, every day, contributing to the effort. We didn't have the luxury of rest, High Chronicler. We knew what was coming. I should have felt fear. I should have felt despair. Instead, I felt something I had not experienced in centuries. Hope. The Harvester came for humanity on the first day of what the humans called the New Year. I was on Hope's anchor when the alarm sounded, surrounded by refugees from a dozen dead civilizations, watching as the humans calmly moved to their battle stations. There was no panic, no chaos, no screaming or running or desperate last-minute preparations. The humans simply shifted. One moment they were caretakers and healers and administrators. The next, they were something else entirely, something harder, something colder. Dr. Tanaka found me in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. She was wearing a uniform I had never seen before, dark gray, functional, devoid of any decoration except for a small patch over her heart. The patch showed a simple image, a blue marble, floating in darkness. "Earth," she said, following my gaze to the patch. "That's what we're fighting for. Not just our world, all the worlds that could have been like ours, all the species that could have grown up to be what we are."
"What you are," I repeated. "And what is that exactly?"
She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the weight of generations in her eyes. The famines and the plagues and the wars, the gas chambers and the gulags and the mushroom clouds, the endless grinding struggle of a species that refused to die. "Survivors," she said. "We are survivors, High Chronicler, and we protect our own." The Harvester arrived at the edge of human space 17 hours later. I watched the feeds from the command center, surrounded by human officers who spoke in calm, clipped tones as they coordinated a response across hundreds of light years. The entity was vast, incomprehensible, a presence that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that my mind could not process. It had destroyed the Mortai in hours. It had shattered the Velshari in days. It had consumed the light of the Luminari in a single, terrible instant. It spoke to the humans as it had spoken to every species before them. Its voice echoed through every communication channel, every mind, every dream.
"The time has come," it said, and the words were less sound than pressure, less meaning than inevitability. "The tribute is due. You have served well. Now you will serve forever." I expected the humans to respond with weapons, with threats, with defiance or pleas or some final desperate gamble. Instead, a single voice replied, calm, measured, almost conversational. "Thank you for your patience," the voice said. I recognized it after a moment. Admiral Sarah Chen, the same woman who had stood before the Concorde all those years ago. She was older now, gray-haired and weathered, but her voice still carried that same quiet certainty. "We've been looking forward to this conversation." "There is no conversation. There is only tribute." "See, that's where we disagree." Admiral Chen's voice never wavered.
43 years ago, you came to us in our dreams. You told us what you were, what you wanted, what you would do if we refused, and you made a fundamental miscalculation.
There is no miscalculation. I am eternal. I have devoured 10,000 civilizations. You are nothing. You assumed we would react like the elder races, that we would fight or bargain or hide, that our response would be limited by our current capabilities, our current understanding, our current technology. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something in her voice that made my scales tighten. You forgot that we are the species that invented fire.
And then we invented 10,000 ways to make that fire burn hotter, faster, and more destructively than any natural process in the universe.
Your threats are meaningless. I am beyond your comprehension. No, Admiral Chen said, and the command center around me began to hum with activity. Officers shouting coordinates, displays lighting up with target solutions. The entire vast machinery of human warfare awakening from its long preparation. You are exactly within our comprehension. We've spent 40 years studying you, learning you, finding your weaknesses. I have no weaknesses. You have one. You're arrogant. You're so convinced of your own invincibility that you never considered the possibility of prey that hunts back. The display in front of me shifted. I saw human space, the small confined territory that the Concord had grudgingly granted them, and I saw, for the first time, what they had hidden there. It was not a fleet. It was not a weapon. It was a network, a vast, interconnected web of stations and satellites and devices that spanned every system, every world, every corner of their territory. And at its heart, at the center of the web, was a structure I could not identify. A machine of such scale that it dwarfed planets. A device that pulsed with energy I could not name.
We call it the cage, Dr. Tanaka said quietly from beside me. We've been building it since the day you first spoke to us.
What does it do? I asked. It's a dimensional anchor. A net woven from mathematics and spite. It prevents anything caught within it from escaping to other dimensions, from running, from hiding. I stared at her. You're going to trap it? We're going to kill it. The harvester laughed. The sound shook reality, made the stars themselves seem to flicker. You cannot kill what is eternal. I have existed since before your star was born. I will exist long after your species is dust and memory. Maybe, Admiral Chen said. Let's find out. All ships, Operation Prometheus. Engage. What happened next is difficult to describe. The human language has words for it, words like battle and war and annihilation, but none of them capture the scale of what I witnessed. 400 million ships, 400 million points of light converging on the harvester from every direction. They died by the thousands, by the millions, but more kept coming, an endless tide of metal and fury that crashed against the entity like waves against a cliff. And unlike the elder races who would have retreated after such losses, the humans pressed forward, ship after ship sacrificing itself to deliver a single warhead, a single payload, a single piece of the weapon they had spent 40 years designing. The cage activated. I felt it in my bones, in my cells, in some part of me that I did not know existed.
A vast, invisible structure snapping into place around the harvester, a prison woven from the fabric of reality itself. The entity screamed, a sound that drove half the refugees on the station to their knees, and tried to flee.
It could not.
For the first time in its eternal existence, the harvester was trapped, confined, limited to a single place, a single time, a single reality. And the humans were not finished.
"Secondary fleet, commence bombardment," Admiral Chen ordered. "All stations, activate the spears."
The spears. I learned later what they were. Weapons designed specifically to harm a being that existed partially outside normal space. Dimensional disruption devices, reality-shredding warheads, technologies that the elder races had never conceived, because we had never imagined we would need them.
The humans had imagined. The humans had prepared. The humans had spent 40 years, trillions of lives worth of resources, an entire civilization's focus and determination on this single moment. The harvester died.
It took 3 days, 3 days of constant bombardment, of sacrifice, of loss. The human fleet was reduced to less than 50 million ships. Entire stations were destroyed when the dying entity lashed out in its death throes. Billions of refugees, the very people the humans had been trying to protect, were killed in the crossfire. But the harvester died.
I stood in the observation lounge as the final screams faded from the void. Dr. Tanaka was beside me, her face gray with exhaustion, her uniform stained with the blood of colleagues who had not survived the entity's psychic attacks. But she was smiling.
"It's over," she said softly. "It's finally over."
I looked at her, at this small, fragile creature from a small, fragile world, at this representative of a species that the Concord had voted to punish for speaking truth. "What happens now?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Now we rebuild, not just human space, all of it. Every world that fell, every species that was devoured, every corner of the galaxy that the harvester touched." "You would help rebuild the civilizations that voted to punish you?" "Yes." "Why?" She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen in any of the elder races. Not pride, not vengeance, something deeper, something harder to name. "Because that's not who we want to be," she said. "The harvester consumed, it destroyed, it took and never gave anything back. If we become like that, if we use our power to punish those who wronged us, then we become just another version of the thing we destroyed." She placed a hand on my arm, and the touch was warm, alive, full of promise. "High Chronicler, you've lived for 900 years. You've watched species rise and fall. You've seen empires built and burned. Tell me, in all that time, have you ever seen a civilization last by taking?" I thought about the question, really thought about it. The Mortai, who had taken resources from 1,000 worlds, gone. The Velshari, who had taken profit from every trade route in the galaxy, gone. The Valketh Ascendancy, my own people, who had taken territory and power and prestige wherever we could find it, nearly gone. "No," I admitted. "No, I have not." "Neither have we. That's the lesson we learned in our century of ashes. Taking destroys, giving builds. It's simple, really. Simple and incredibly, terribly hard." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "But we're humans. Hard is what we do."
That was 700 years ago.
I am old now. Older than any Volketh has ever been, thanks to the life extension technologies that the humans shared freely with every species that asked. My scales are gray, my movements slow, my memories sometimes uncertain. But I still remember that day. I still remember the moment I understood what humanity truly was.
They rebuilt the galaxy. Not alone. They were never so arrogant as to believe they could do it alone, but as partners, leaders, teachers. The species that had been dismissed as primitives became the architects of a new order. Not an empire, not a hegemony, a community, a family of races learning to live together, learning to grow together, learning the hard lesson that humanity had paid for in blood and ash.
Taking destroys. Giving builds.
The Concord no longer exists. In its place is something called the Terran Accord, a name that most species insisted upon over human objections. It is led by a council of representatives from every sapient species in the galaxy, with no one voice holding more power than any other. Decisions are made by consensus, conflicts resolved through dialogue, resources shared according to need rather than hoarded according to greed.
It is not perfect. Nothing built by imperfect beings ever is, but it is better. So much better than what came before.
I am writing this chronicle on Earth. The humans invited me here a century ago, and I never left. It is a small world, really, small and blue and fragile, hanging in the darkness like a jewel. It is nothing like the grand monuments of the elder races, the crystal spires and light sculptures and world ships that once seemed so impressive. But it is alive. That is what I have come to understand about humanity. They do not build monuments to their own glory. They build gardens, nurseries, places where things can grow. I sit in my quarters and look out at the city that sprawls beneath my window. It is called New Geneva, and it is the heart of the Accord's diplomatic corps. Beings from 1,000 species walk its streets, work in its offices, raise their children in its schools. And everywhere, there are humans, helping, teaching, connecting. A young Valketh visits me sometimes. His name is Keth Voran, same as mine. It has become a common name among my people, a way of honoring the chronicler who first wrote the truth about humanity. He is curious and eager and full of questions about the old days, the dark days, the time before the humans saved us all. High Chronicler, he asked me yesterday, do you ever regret it? The vote, the punishment? I considered the question for a long time before answering. Every day, I said finally, I regret the arrogance that led us to believe we could judge a species we did not understand. I regret the cruelty that allowed us to punish them for being right. I regret every life that was lost because we were too proud to admit our mistakes. The young one's scales rippled with distress. But the humans have forgiven us. They've said so many times. Forgiveness does not erase regret, I told him. It simply makes the regret bearable.
He thought about this for a moment. What do you think the galaxy would look like if the Concord had made a different choice, if we had welcomed the humans instead of punishing them?
I laughed, a dry, rattling sound that startled us both. I so rarely laugh anymore. I think it would look much the same, I said. The humans would still have saved us. They would still have rebuilt what was broken. They would still be here, helping and teaching and connecting.
Then what difference did the vote make? I reached out and placed my withered hand on his young, smooth scales.
The vote made no difference to them, I said. That is what makes them what they are. They did not save us because we deserved it. They saved us because saving is what they do. It is their nature, their purpose, the core of their identity as a species. I turned back to the window, watching the sun set over New Geneva. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple and gold, and the first stars were beginning to emerge. The vote made a difference to us, I continued. It showed us who we were, what we were capable of in our arrogance and fear. And when the humans saved us anyway, it showed us who we could become if we were brave enough to learn. The young one was silent for a long time. Then he asked the question that all young Valketh ask, eventually.
What are they, High Chronicler? The humans. What are they really?
I smiled. Another rare occurrence these days. They are what happens, I said, when a species refuses to die, when it crawls through every hell the universe can devise and comes out the other side not hardened into cruelty, but tempered into compassion. They are the answer to the question that the elder races never thought to ask. What is strength, really?
I looked at him, this young inheritor of a rebuilt civilization, this child of a redeemed species.
Strength is not the power to destroy, young one. Strength is the power to build, to heal, to protect, to endure. And then, after you have endured the unendurable, to turn around and offer your hand to those who tried to break you. I looked back at the stars, those patient teachers that I finally understood.
That is humanity. That is what they are, and that is why the galaxy, which tried to punish them, now owes them everything.
The Concord voted to punish Earth.
The galaxy paid instead.
But in the end, it was not the payment of a debt or the tribute of the defeated. It was something far more valuable. It was the payment of a lesson learned, the tribute of humility freely given, the price of wisdom gladly paid.
And humanity, those eternal survivors, those magnificent builders, those quiet keepers of a strength we never understood, they accepted our payment with open hands and gentle eyes, and they built something beautiful from the ashes of our arrogance.
They built a future. They built hope.
They built a galaxy where even the proudest elder races could learn to be young again. I close this chronicle now. My hands are tired, my eyes are dim, and the young Kethvoron is waiting to walk me to dinner. But before I go, I want to record one final thing. The words that Ambassador Sarah Chen, who became Admiral Chen, who became Governor Chen, who became simply grandmother to 3 generations of human children, said to me on her deathbed. She was 263 years old, ancient even by the new standards. Her hair was white as starlight, her face a map of a life fully lived. But her eyes, those dark, deep eyes that had faced down the conquered and the harvester and 1,000 lesser challenges, were still bright, still fierce, still full of that terrifying, wonderful humanity. "Keth," she said, using the nickname she had given me centuries ago, "do you remember what you asked me the first time we met on Hope's Anchor?" "I asked what you wanted from us," I replied. "What you wanted from me." "And do you remember what I said?" "You said you wanted us to live." She smiled and reached out to take my hand in her frail, soft fingers. "I was wrong," she said. "That's not what we wanted. Not really." "Then what?" I asked, leaning close to hear her fading voice. "We wanted you to grow," she whispered, "to learn,
to become something better than you were, because that's what we wanted for ourselves. That's what we've always wanted. Not just to survive, but to matter, to leave the universe a little better than we found it.
Her eyes closed, and her grip on my hand relaxed.
Did we succeed, Keth? She asked, her voice barely a breath. Did we matter?
I looked at her, this small, fragile creature from a small, fragile world, this representative of a species that had been dismissed and punished and nearly destroyed, this woman who had helped save the galaxy and then helped rebuild it, and then helped teach it to be better.
Yes, I said, and my voice broke on the word. Yes, you mattered. You still matter. You will always matter. She smiled one last time, and then she was gone. I am the last of the original witnesses now, the last being alive who remembers the galaxy before humanity saved it. Soon I too will be gone, and this chronicle will be all that remains of those dark, desperate, transformative days. But that is as it should be. The past exists to teach us, not to bind us. The stars still shine, patient and eternal, and the lessons they offer are always the same. Endure, learn, grow, give. And if you are very lucky, if you are very brave, if you can crawl through every hell the universe devises and come out the other side with your compassion intact, you just might matter. You just might make a difference. You just might be humanity.